Kavinaka to all our audience who have joined us virtually this morning, and a warm welcome to one and all. My presentation this morning, I will try to keep to the allocated time of 10 minutes, Yoli. So please just let me know if I do go overboard. All right, so just go on to slide 2, please. Yes, so one of the main goals of open data is to improve efficiency of public services, which is the core of good governance discussion today. And yes, open data has been recognized not only to improve accountability, but also efficiency of government services. So my presentation this morning will expand more on this, accentuating the means to an end relationship, which is really open data underpinning good governance. Next slide, please. Great. Just before we go into the core of open data and good governance literature, on the original front, I'd like to emphasize the leaders' commitment and aspirations around good governance. Yes, promoting good governance is a central priority for Pacific leaders and of course the Pacific people. And these commitments were entrenched in the Big Qatar Declaration over 20 years ago, and recently reinforced in the Boyd Declaration to allow free, healthy, and productive lives for all our Pacific people. Despite these commitments, the depth of data and open data challenges in the Pacific, compounded by the nature of its people, its values, its culture, its faiths and politics, geography, resources, and its history, present a unique governance development challenge. So this reinforces the call for open data strengthening in the region. The 2050 strategy actually encapsulates how we can best work together for the next 3 decades, and it will uphold the cultural, economic, and strategic aspirations of the Pacific people and states that will charge into, and take forward, the Pacific people's ambition and determination for a sustainable, inclusive future for all. Recently, our forum leaders declared the 10-year vision, which provides a regional commitment to progress, Pacific unity against corruption, and our colleagues from UNDP and also NGI will be articulating and providing more information around this. Thank you. Next slide, please, Sioli. All right, what is good governance? Sorry, I think the slide is a bit, never mind. Good governance, it has been defined as the processes by which public institutions manage public affairs and resources through which of society are decided upon, issues of society are decided upon and are monitored. And it also guarantees respect for human rights with regard to the rule of law. It may be defined as the function of government to protect life and property of its citizens, ensure rule of law, gainfully exploit countries' assets and resources, and it may span topics relating to effective participation, multi-actor partnerships, political pluralism, transparent accountability, processes and institutions, and of course, access to knowledge, information and education, political empowerment of people and civil society and so forth. So that's basically what good governance entails. All right, on to our next slide, which presents the characteristics of good governance. According to, as I've alluded to, according to the definition of good governance, these are the 8 characteristics which actually defined good governance, and they are participatory, consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, effective and efficient, equitable and inclusive, and follows the rule of law. So briefly on participatory, it refers to the opportunity for involvement, for active involvement rather, by all sectors of society in the decision-making process regarding all issues of interest. It fosters an enabling environment where information is appropriately disseminated in a timely fashion, so that all concerned people can voice their opinion in an unconstrained manner. For rule of law, it means that legal frameworks exist, there's law and order, the justice system is independent and effective, property rights and contracts are enforced, and human rights norms are implemented, as well as the constitution constrains the power of the executive. So that is on rule of law. For transparency, it exists where the process of decision making by those in power can be scrutinized by concerned members of society, which implies a transparent government makes it clear what is being done, how and why actions take place, who is involved, and by what standards decisions are made. On responsiveness to the needs of people, it exists where institutions and processes readily serve all stakeholders in a prompt and appropriate manner so that the interests of all citizens are protected. Yes, and also identifying and addressing built-in discriminatory practices affecting ethnic or marginalized groups, including gender responsiveness. For consensus orientation, it ensures that existing systems serve the best interests of society. So this may be one of the most difficult principles in the sense that any action or policy is likely to affect different groups in society in different and often opposing ways. So therefore, different viewpoints must be taken into account to arrive at the most suitable and appropriate policies and strategies. All right. So next slide, please. I'm sorry.
So I've moved to the next slide to Julia. There may be a bit of delay in showing on your screens, but I'm on the governance in the Pacific slide.
All right. In fact, I was going to, never mind, it's all right. Okay, I haven't actually finished the previous slide actually, Sioli. Never mind, I'll just go, yeah, right, thank you. Okay, on equity and inclusiveness, it exists where everyone has opportunities to improve or maintain their well-being. And this means that all members of society, especially the most vulnerable, are taken into consideration in policy making, and no one feels alienated, disenfranchised, or left behind. In terms of government effectiveness and efficiency, this exists where processes and institutions make the best use of resources to produce results that meet the needs of society. So effectiveness and efficiency require the enhancement of quality and standardization of public service delivery, the professionalization of the bureaucracy, and focusing on government efforts on vital functions and elimination of redundancies, overlaps in functions and operations. In terms of accountability, this is based on the principle that every person or group is responsible for their actions, especially when their acts affect the public interest. So yes, it refers to the answerability or responsibility for one's actions, so that systems exist for decision makers in government, the private sector, and civil society as a whole. All right, thank you. Next slide, please, Sioli. All right, governance in the Pacific. So in many states of the world, many people Hello?
Hello, Julia.
All right, okay, sorry. Good governance has always been a sensitive issue in development debates, more so in the Pacific. So given the short time since independence was achieved and the importance attached to traditional culture and value systems, and I would like to emphasize here that our values, culture, traditions, and the elements of nature, such as land, sea, and forest, they define and shape the Pacific people way of living, relationships, behavior, moral conduct, thought systems, and economy. So as a prelude to featuring the nature of governance in the Pacific, I would like to underline our very own Pacific Way ideology, whereof it accentuated Pacific cultures and languages are to be strengthened, traditions and cultures are to be honored and developed. And for many years, the concept of the Pacific Way, as most of you may be aware, was used by Pacific Island states to define and differentiate themselves from other developing countries and regions of the world. It was actually coined by the late Ratu Sakamu Mara in 1970, the then Prime Minister of Fiji. It came to symbolize a way of doing things specific to the Pacific. It emphasized moderation, respect, consensual dialogue, inclusiveness, preparedness to negotiate, flexibility, adaptation, and compromise. And these virtues or way of doing things are analogous to the contemporary good governance characteristics that I've just alluded to. And it actually implies honesty, mutual respect, and tolerance. So it is based on that recognition of acceptance of differences, but with an underlying awareness of the need to find unity and consensus. So it has been used as a guide by a sense of justice, compassion, guided by a sense of justice, compassion, also tolerance and understanding. And it is about working together or consensus. So that is a prelude that I would like to introduce the governance structure of the governance structure in the Pacific and how we understand it in a Pacific context. So in many states of the world, many people shape their lives according to traditional rules, principles, and customs, and they arrange political matters according to customary law, solve their issues in customary courts, and draw on their traditional authorities for the provision of collective goods. And these practices exist in the Pacific region. And to ask questions about indigenous governance in the Pacific is to ask questions about cultural fit or compatibility. Thank you, Sioli. And in a region composed of small-scale rural communities and a variety of distinctive language groups, local institutions are highly valued. So with exception, Pacific societies have been and are presently led by chiefs. Some Melanesian societies develop egalitarian societies and relations in which any person of proven capacity could seek chiefly status. And in Polynesia, hierarchically organized societies were divisible into noble and communal families. So such societal attributes continue to affect the structure and operation of government at the present time. So yes, the Pacific way of life and thinking are defined, shaped, and centered on our values, faiths, cultures, and traditions. And these specific values are analogous to the characteristics of contemporary good governance, and they're inherent and evidently our rule. We would like, if you may, we could regard them as our rule of law or code of conduct. Yes, so just briefly describing these values. For example, religious beliefs are an important aspect of life for many Pacific Island people, and also we have numerous faiths and beliefs represented across the region, and Christianity is the most widespread, and therefore it is vital to always recognize the faith elements of the Pacific people, respecting, inculcating, and mainstreaming the moral voice in national plans, policies, strategies, and often even in our regional frameworks and declaration, quite important. So even donor funded projects and interventions should respect, of course, the faith principles and faith community structures to make development interventions successful. Otherwise, they could be viewed as purely secular. So in doing so, it is believed to engender a just, transparent, sustainable, and peaceful society that actually mirrors and echoes the essence and the definition of good governance. So in terms of solidarity, yes, it is an awareness of shared interests, objective standards, and sympathies, creating a sense of unity of groups and of classes that bind people together as one. And this is quite evident in the Pacific. Reciprocity means mutual action and reaction. And of course, one of the The elements of reciprocity for us is the gifting culture that we have. It occurs in a number of contexts, including interactions with and between specific individuals, churches, groups, organizations, and communities. And it may occupy a position similar to that of Isiavusiavu in Fiji, or Mea Alofa in Samoa, or Mea Ofa in Tonga, Pingaro in the Cook Islands, or Mea Aloha in Tokelau, and so forth. Yes. And in terms of kinship networks, these actually underpin the social cohesion, nurturing members of society, inheritance of property, succession of social position, support network, and conflict settlement, of course, and also economic needs and social needs, physical strength, processes, and procedures. Coming to land and sea. Land and sea have both economic importance, as we know, as well as symbolic and emotional significance for the Pacific people who find their identity in them, and local knowledge of genealogies and local histories underpin management of land and sea. So this type of knowledge is closely guarded, not part of any public record, but while many aspects of genealogy and history are now written down, a great deal of local knowledge is only expressed orally in practice. So this could be an opportunity for this forum to probably discuss how we could integrate and mainstream this into our open data development agenda and efforts going forward. So these values and traditional forms, so yes, they equally mirror the contemporary characteristics of good governance and weaved into the fabrics of our Pacific governance structures. So, but efforts are required to increasingly recognize and integrate these values and moral voice into our national development structures and frameworks, as I've alluded to, and also integrated into our open data scope of work and agenda. So we can see that these have largely helped us to be sustainable in the face of our many adversities and also ensure no one is left behind. Thank you. Next slide, please, Sioli. All right. Please do let me know if I'm within the time allocated for me to present.
You're still good.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So for slide 8, yes, it's on why open data or why open government data is important. My colleagues from PDH will articulate more on this, and but I'll just provide a brief description to accentuate the means to an end relationship or causal mechanism underlying this linkage, as the World Bank defines open data as data and all valuable information that is free and easily accessible to anyone without limitations or restrictions. And data or content is open if anyone is free to use, reuse, or redistribute, subject at most to match the reserve provenance and openness. So yes, open data brings wide-ranging benefits to governments and many different groups, organizations, and individuals. It keeps duty bearers or governments alert and responsive to society and responsible for their actions. Similarly, it empowers rights holders or citizens to know what the government is doing and hold them to account. So it strengthens citizens, including marginalized groups, to be directly informed and involved in the decision-making processes of governance in both the public and political spheres. Excuse me. Next slide, please, Sioli. So very briefly on the benefits of open data. The benefits are diverse and range from improved efficiency of public administrations, economic growth in the private sector to wider social welfare. Government performance can be enhanced by open data and contribute to improving the efficiency of public services, and also great efficiency in processes and delivery of public services can be achieved through sharing of data, which can, for example, provide an overview of unnecessary spending, policy implementation, targeted budget responsive targeted spending, and also policy implementation. So the economy can benefit from easier access to information And also social welfare can be improved as society benefits from information that is more transparent and accessible. I will leave this to our colleagues from PDH to expand more on this, because they will be talking more on open data and its benefits to our region. I will go right into to the next slide, please, Sioli. All right, open data critical for good governance. So from accelerating economic growth to ensuring government accountability, open data can benefit citizens, organizations, and the government themselves. So it enhances citizens' participation in traditional policymaking and contemporary public and political processes of decision making. It brings wide-ranging benefits to government and many different groups, organizations, and individuals. As I've alluded to, it keeps duty bearers or governments alert and responsive to society and responsible for their actions, and it strengthens citizens, including marginalized groups, to be directly informed and involved in the decision-making processes. And also, as we could witness that the pandemic and the unprecedented weather events that we have encountered have really underscored the need for quality open data for more than ever, and therefore open quality data is vital for effective emergency response. It actually engenders opportunities for needed collaboration, building trust and credible relationships between government, organization, and civil society to address the effects of the pandemic and the aftermath of natural disasters. And of course, these partnerships must be inclusive and must ensure participatory approaches to steer concerted efforts expedient for our resilience and building back civil liberty as well as a sustainable, resilient society. So quality open data allows citizens to be informed of and monitor government activities and hold government accountable. In the Pacific, some governments have developed ministerial websites and information systems that people can access to acquire information regarding government's activities, budget spending, and policy implementation, including online public services. And also open data mechanisms must be well-resourced and managed to ensure their reliability and accuracy. And of course, our citizens should be educated, our people should be educated on how to read and use open data to make informed decisions, advocate for reforms, participate in public policy meaningfully and effectively, and hold government to account. Next slide, please, Sioli. Right, this will be my slides last. So it actually aims to emphasize and underline the linkages between open data, good governance, and human rights. As we know, studies inform that the true test of good governance is the degree to which it delivers on the promise of human rights, encompassing civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. And the key question is, are the institutions of governance effectively guaranteeing the rights to health, adequate housing, sufficient food, quality education for justice, personal security? And I must say that most of these rights are actually entrenched in the constitutions of most of our jurisdictions in the region. So an underlying factor between good governance and human rights constitute openness in government operation, which is determined by freedom of access to information and understanding of decision-making mechanisms. It is about clarity, government rules, regulations, and decisions. So good governance and human rights are mutually reinforcing, and they actually provide standards and principles and set of values to guide the work of governments in other political and social sectors, and also provide a set of performance against which these actors can be held accountable. So moreover, the human rights principles inform the content of good governance efforts, and they may inform the development of legislative frameworks, policies, programs, and budgetary allocations and other measures. On the other hand, without good governance, we feel that human rights cannot be respected and protected in a sustainable manner. And the implementation of human rights, of course, relies on a conducive and enabling environment. And this includes appropriate legal frameworks and institutions, as well as political, managerial, and administrative processes responsible for responding to the rights and needs of the population. So the links between good governance and human rights can be organized around 4 areas: democratic institutions, public service delivery, rule of law, and anti-corruption. So very briefly on democratic institutions, when led by human rights values, good governance reforms of democratic institutions create avenues for the public to participate in policy making, and also form institutions or informed consultations. And of course, public service delivery, good governance reforms advance human rights. They improve the state's capacity to fulfill its responsibility to provide and deliver public goods, which are essential for the protection of a number of human rights. And also, as I've alluded to, on rule of law, and then anti-corruption. Our colleagues from UNDP and NDI will expand more on this. And of course, yes, it is important for fighting corruption, and good governance efforts actually rely on principles such as accountability, transparency, and participation to shape anti-corruption measures. And this is where open data is critical, because it actually informs government efforts on the processes and tools and interventions required to strengthen and increase the integrity of government transactions, therefore allowing transparency and accountability, promotion, strengthening in our governance systems. Thank you. So in closing, my presentation today, understanding the linkages between open data, good governance, and human rights in the Pacific. It is important that we learn through the lenses and perspectives of our community, our traditions, our culture, religious values. And to be able to do this better, we can be in a better position to weave, rather than asserting human rights, into our governance structures and frameworks, which should enable and empower communities to really appreciate, of course, our duty bearers and right bearers, appreciate the value of human rights and responsibilities that come with it. Thank you.